You know, if I had £1 for every time I stopped here, I'd be quite a wealthy man. This must be one of the most iconic places in South Wales, and there are very few places in Britain where you can travel along a very busy main road, pull into a car park and get these astonishing vistas and panoramas. Our film today is all about the A4061 road between Hirwaun and Treherbert, although we will be making a few diversions here and there to explore some of the wonderful history. So where better to start than here, Rhondda Fawr, this uppermost point of the western valley of this most famous coal mining area. The name Rhondda must be one of the most famous both inside Wales and outside of the country. And here, beneath the shadow of Pen Peak, is a classic example of a mining village. That was established after the railway was opened here in 1859, along with the sinking of the various pits and, of course, the building of this network of workers' housing. The pits here lasted for well over 100 years, but of course they closed and were swept away. And one of them, the site of one of them, was actually reused as a Wild West theme park in 1987. I think it lasted a couple of months. Until the 1920s, this was as far as you could get with any form of motorised transport, be it combustion engine or steam power. And if, say, you wanted to get to Merthyr Tydfil, well, that meant travelling by rail, a dozen miles down the valley to Pontypridd, changing trains, and then travelling same kind of distance northwards into Merthyr. However, if you wanted to get to Blaen Gwynfi in the Avon Valley, then you could do so by travelling through an amazing piece of Victorian railway engineering. A tunnel through the mountainside from here in Blaen Cwm across into the Avon Valley took 5 years to bore, and it was opened on the 2nd of July 1890. And by any standards, this is a superb bit of engineering, burrowing a distance of nearly 2 miles, carrying the Rhondda and Swansea Bay Railway. Such was the wealth generated by digging the black diamonds in this valley of Rhondda that the need to get huge volumes of coal more than justified the construction of an amazing, important tunnel. What I find so fascinating is that in the middle of this intense concentration of late 19th century housing, it's still possible to come across reminders of pre-industrial Rhondda. And this is a superb example, Tynydd Farm, which dates from 1652, one of the most important farms in the whole of this area at that time. This really was a very important farm, especially during the 18th century, when the so-called squire of Rhondda lived here, a certain Thomas Edwards, and he had 6 sons. And I've got here a list of what they did. They included a clothier, a colonel who fought in India, an attorney, a surgeon who incidentally died of exposure on the mountain between Tynydd and Aberdare on the 22nd of December 1832. There was also naturally a farmer and a drover. And of course, families like this were so vitally important. They were such an essential part of the community at that time. One of the terrific things about these valleys of South Wales is that within a matter of minutes you can move away from the conurbations into really lovely open environments such as this, which may not have been dissimilar to the view that Benjamin Heath Malkin saw in 1803 when he came into Rhondda Fawr. He said, "There is a degree of luxuriance in the valley infinitely beyond what my entrance on the district led me to expect. The contrast of the meadows, rich and verdant, with mountains the most wild and romantic surrounding them on every side, is in the highest degree picturesque." But that scene was to change so very quickly by the middle of the 19th century, as deep pits were sunk, as houses were built, chapels, pubs, workingmen's institute, everything that was needed to support that industrial community, including these single-storey cottages that predate 1865 and may well have been built to house the sinkers who dug the actual pit shafts. They were followed, of course, as the century progressed, certainly towards in the closing years of the 19th century, with other houses, including this row of houses that was actually built as a planned community. There are some amazing statistics about this valley. In 1901, it was estimated that on average there were 6 people living in each house. And little wonder, therefore, that there were terrific demands upon sewage disposal and good fresh water supply. I remember reading a statistic, whether or not it's correct, I can't vouch for that, but it reckoned that there were more people living per square mile in the valleys of Rhondda than there were living per square mile in New York. So the supply of good clean water was absolutely essential. As the valley expanded, so the demands increased. And there was a marvellous piece of engineering, because just behind me, tucked up in the combe there, was the location of a tunnel that was driven right through the mountain to tap into a lake on the other side of the mountain there, Llyn Fawr. The supply of large quantities of clean water was crucial, and it was the enlargement in 1912 of the glaciated Llyn Fawr into a reservoir, along with the drilling of a 1¼ mile long tunnel that resulted in the discovery of one of the most important Iron Age hoards in Britain. 21 items were discovered, including an iron spearhead, horse harness, and cauldrons made from sheets of hammered bronze held together with bronze rivets. It's thought that these precious artifacts were part of a votive offering thrown into the lake. They're now in the care of the National Museum of Wales. Perhaps those early people who were as impressed with this amazing sight as I am today, and these still waters sitting beneath this outstanding example of a glaciated quarry, which, along with neighbouring Llyn Fawr just over a mile away, are part of a site of special scientific interest. So I can imagine them gathering together and casting the items into the water as an offering to their gods in the hope of a good harvest and good fortune for the community. I can so understand why this place was so significant to our forebears, but this sense of significance continues to this day, because I find it deeply touching and moving to look at these memorials right the way along the hillside here that have appeared almost spontaneously. And perhaps the people who are commemorated here loved this place as much as I do. And I find just being here, looking out across this wonderful panorama, does so much to lift my spirits. On the top here, between Treherbert and Hirwaun, is a fascinating archaeological site, Hen Dre'r Mynydd, and its name is a very good clue. The old town, or settlement is perhaps a better description, the old town on the mountain. This site has been explored at various times over the past 100 years or so, and the evidence gathered indicates that it was occupied during the Iron Age and by the ubiquitous Romans. What I find fascinating is that a geophysical survey in 2015 indicated a much larger site that was bisected by the old parish road that connected the two valleys. It was a short paragraph in the report of the South Wales Regional Survey Committee that was published in the early 1920s that was to influence the building of the first proper road system that was designed to provide a viable all-weather link between the valleys. The report stated, "The improvement of existing valley roads and the construction, where practicable, of new lengths of road are matters of some urgency." The link between Treherbert and Hirwaun was finally completed in 1929, and I have some facts and figures about the construction of the road. The cost of the road then worked out at £15,500 per mile, and I did a very rough calculation, and that's about 900,000 today. So a fairly hefty investment by any standards. And the total cost of all the roads, again estimated at today's prices, about 25 million. The Minister of Transport at the time said that the inter-valley roads were a work of social reform, and besides their construction, they also provided much needed employment for out-of-work miners. It was stipulated that 75% of the people engaged on the construction of the roads should be drawn from the ranks of the unemployed. These are some truly spectacular examples of road engineering, with these quite amazing cuttings, embankments and curves, but especially impressive when we consider that it was mainly human animal muscle power and explosives that were used for its construction. The rocks on the side of the road here can be very friable, and of course they're subject to frost, wind and rain, but the steel mesh now provides very important safety measures. But before that was installed, that work was down to the roadman, who was responsible for looking after this length of road and keeping it clear and warning about any changes in conditions. And he was provided with accommodation in this wonderful little hut. One of the well-known occupants was George Coles, who for over 16 years created one of the most remarkable and delightful gardens in all of Wales. No elegant lawns or arcades of trees adorn this landscape, but a glorious array of plastic flowers, windmills, dragons, penguins, and welcome signs laid out in painted stones. His garden was ever-changing and sometimes reflected current events. I remember passing by on one occasion when there'd been a notable win by Wales over the English, and the scores were written in huge letters on the hillside. The following year, when Wales lost, the scores were reported, but much smaller scale of letters. I checked online to find, to my pleasure, that there's a Facebook page dedicated to the memory of George and the preservation of his hut and the recreation of his garden. About a mile away from the road is another memorial, but this one is rather sad. On the 11th of April 1902, William Llewellyn, a 5-year-old boy, went missing from Aberraman. The following day, about 12,000 people scoured the mountains, but to no avail, and it wasn't until the 26th that his body was found, not far from here. It was reported that so great were the numbers attending his funeral that it took the procession 40 minutes to pass any given point. So while we're on the subject of memorials, what better image to memorize the history of coal mining in South Wales than a tall, gaunt head frame? Sure, there are quite a few preserved across the area, but this one here at Tower Colliery is different because it's a symbol of courage, tenacity and sheer bloody mindedness when the miners realised the impossible dream of buying this colliery in the face of privatisation and closure. With widespread report, each of the 239 miners pledged £8,000 of their redundancy money to raise the purchase price of this colliery, which was then about £2 million. This pit continued to operate until 2008, and I've had the good fortune to have gone underground here on a number of occasions and met some of the people involved in that quite heroic struggle. And what always impressed me was their great sense of purpose, great sense of community, and of course the pride in providing employment for a good number of men for a fair number of years. And then I turn around, and in my wildest dreams, when I was coming to this pit when I first visited in the early 1970s and on many subsequent occasions, but I could have never thought or imagined that I would be looking at a zip wire. It's just staggering to think, here we have this zip wire here in South Wales, and there's another one in North Wales, now providing another form of employment, and certainly a marvellous piece of recreation. Wouldn't it be great to come back and say 100 years and see what on earth is happening on this site? This place has seen protest and reform for a long while. In 1831, it was here on this common that saw the emergence of union organisation. Workers from Merthyr Tydfil rose in protest about wage cuts and in favour of political reform, and took on, repelled and disarmed the local unionary who'd been sent in to quash the uprising. A calf was sacrificed and a tablecloth was dipped in its blood, and so was raised the very first red flag. And if that wasn't enough, there was further confrontation with authority during the so-called Hirwaun gas tanks battle in the early 1970s, when protesters, supported by the Aberdare Trades Council and the Hirwaun Action Committee, objected to the construction of massive gas tanks on the common here. Planning permission had been granted, but members of the local community were concerned about safety and amenity issues and picketed the entrance to the site for over 4 years. It culminated on the 15th of March 1974, when contractors engaged by the British Gas Corporation, supported by 70 police, tried to force access. The word went out, and a small army of mainly women workers from the nearby industrial estate downed tools and joined in the picket. The eventual outcome was that it was decided that the gas tanks should be sited elsewhere. And this was an announcement that the community celebrated with a dance and a party at a local club. In making these films, I've always been astonished to find just how much history can be crammed within such a small area. And of course here it's enhanced by this most amazing backdrop. This really is a very special place, looking down to the south over the valleys and towards the coast, and then looking northwards to the Brecon Beacons. This whole area is crisscrossed by tracks and pathways, these wonderful routes that enable us to explore aspects of our marvellous Welsh history.